Hello and a very warm welcome to episode 31 of the Green Bean podcast. My name is Katie, this is Jack, and we're both really glad that you're here. Welcome. This is a podcast where I share my creative projects, be they drawing, knitting or sewing, and Jack and I share our walks out on Dartmoor, which is close to where we live in the southwest of England. What have we got in this episode, buddy? I've got lots of news to share in this episode. It's an exciting one. It's been 5 months since I had my surgery last year and I'm recovering really well. Jack is fed up, so I'm going to pop him down, I think. What do you think? I'm going to pop Jack down and continue to share my exciting news. So yeah, surgery 5 months ago, I've been slowly transitioning back to work and my kind of normal, whatever normal is in 2021, COVID times. It's been an unusual year, hasn't it? But yeah, I've been slowly transitioning back to work, and at this point I've got some pretty exciting projects that I've been working on for a long time that I can finally share with you. The first of which might be obvious. I've been working on my Beetle Magic knitting pattern for over a year. And I'm so proud to share that it is finally here and ready for launch. Here it is. So me being me, I'm an illustrator by trade, if you didn't know. So any excuse to create a beautiful printed object. So I've spent a lot of time working not only on the technical aspects of the pattern, which I'm incredibly proud of, but also creating this illustrated booklet. Which includes instructional illustrations, but also some cute ones as well. So Beetle Magic is graded from children's sizes right up to super large adult sizes. So it goes from a 20-inch to a 68-inch chest measurement. So hopefully it includes a huge range of different body sizes. For the children's sizes, it only has one ring of beetles around the yoke, and obviously the adults has two. So there's a slight difference. And that amount of grading might give you an idea of why this project has taken me such a long time to pull together. It's been a bit of a spreadsheet adventure getting this knitting pattern to work, but I'm so proud of it, and somehow I feel even more proud of it because it's taken so long and over a year that has been, you know, a little bit challenging for many people in lots of different ways to have dealt with coronavirus stuff, and obviously to go through my own personal journey with my surgery last year. To now be at a point where a project that I started a year ago is ready to share with the world. I could not be more proud, and I'm really excited to have this pattern here at last. So I've got this version that I made for myself. It's made with Rivenet's yarn, two different bases. So the main base is a woolen spun 4-ply, which is 100% Jacob. It's called Severn, Severn, like the river, because Rivenet's yarns are all named after rivers, of course. So it's a beautiful, beautiful base for wearing. I love woolen spun yarns. You'll know that if you've watched the podcast for a while. But the contrast colour is the yarn that actually inspired the project. I'm just going to grab the second sample to show you what I mean. So this is the second sample, which I actually knitted for my lovely friend Will, who was going to model for me for this pattern. Unfortunately, because of coronavirus, Will and I are not able to see each other at the moment. We live a little bit too far apart to be called local. So in order for everyone to be safe, we can't see each other for a while. So I modelled both of the jumpers myself, but eventually this version will become Will's and this one will be mine. But I wanted to show you this one because the contrast colour that I used for the Beetles is actually the yarn that inspired the whole project. So Rivenet's created this yarn which is completely unique. It's called Chimera, and I don't have any yarn left in the skein because I knitted it all into a jumper, but it's this incredibly kind of colour changing marl. So a marl is where you have two strands or more plied together, but the two strands are different colours, and those are, in the case of Chimera, dyed and variegated, which is just magical. And Becky from Rivenets dyes Chimera in loads of different colourways with lots of different inspirations. And this particular one that I got inspired by for the Beatles is called Aurora Borealis, after the Northern Lights. And the one in my version, the kind of more earthy, muted version of the jumper, is called Succulents. So it's got shades of pink and terracotta in there, but also some kind of sagey greens as well. And Marcus, who is the other part of Rivenets, Becky and Marcus worked together on the company. He did a version of the Beetle jumper in, I think it's called Pumpkin, the colourway. It's this beautiful fiery orange and red Chimera tones, and his version is just gorgeous as well. So I'm really excited to see what different colourways other people pick for this jumper. I'm just, so proud of it, and really happy to share it with the world. But before we dive into the rest of the episode, I have one more exciting new thing to share with you, because one isn't enough. I'm just going to grab over here. I have washi tape with my own illustrations, and this is a new product that I'm launching this week for Wonderwool Wales. Obviously Wonderwool is not taking place in Wales this year because travel is still not safe, but it's taking place virtually, and I feel a kind of fondness for it because Wonderwool was the very first of the virtual shows that I took part in last year. So it feels kind of weird to have come through a full cycle of a year. And we're not quite ready for real face-to-face shows yet, but I really wanted to have something exciting and new to share for Wonderwool this year. And I've been wanting to add washi tape to my shop for such a long time, and I'm so happy to have finally found a supplier that I'm happy to work with. And the quality is just brilliant. So I've got 3 different versions. I've got a black one, a brown one, and a white one, and they all feature my scratchboard illustrations of British sheep breeds. So I love thinking about the different things that you could use with this. Obviously you could use it on stationery and scrapbooks, that kind of thing. I really enjoy using washi tape when I'm knitting from a chart because it's quite low tack. You can stick it to mark the row that you're working on and then lift it off and move it up the chart as you work. So that's one of my favourite uses for washi tape. So all I need to do is take some lovely photos of these and they'll be up in my shop as well. So lots of exciting news. It's been a really busy time here and I've got a pretty full episode to share with you. I've got some drawing. I'm going to share the process of creating the cover for the Beetle Magic knitting pattern. I've also got quite a lot of knitting projects, you'll see, that I'm looking forward to sharing with you, and some progress with my sewing as well. So grab yourself a drink and I hope you enjoy this episode. In this drawing section, I wanted to talk to you about and show you some of the process that I used to create the front cover for the Beetle Magic knitting pattern. Now, as seems to be the story for many of my projects lately, I started it in one medium and then I changed my mind and did it completely differently. So I began by doing it in Scratchboard, which, if you've watched the podcast for a while, you will know is one of my favourite drawing mediums. But for some reason it just didn't come together. I didn't like how the finished product looked. Obviously I finished it before I decided that it wasn't right, so I started over. And so the version that made it onto the front cover is the second version. And the way that I did this was I drew roughly in pencil and then inked in my favourite Pigma Micron pen the design on a sheet of watercolour paper. Well, I say sheet, it's a watercolour block. So I think I've spoken about these before. You buy them in like a pad of drawing paper, but it's gummed down on all four sides. And what that means is that when you saturate and wet the paper, it doesn't buckle. And you know, if you've ever done any kind of painting, you will know that if you paint onto really thin paper, it will just kind of crinkle up and go yucky as soon as it gets wet. So buying watercolour paper on a block is one way of preventing that. You can also, if you buy loose sheets of watercolour paper, you can stretch them before you do that. But that is a palaver. Let's be honest, you need to have a big board to stretch them on. You also need to have a big enough vessel to fill with water. I used to do it quite a lot when I was painting for children's books. I would soak the paper in the bathtub and then stretch it onto a big drawing board. I no longer have a bathtub in my current home, so stretching big sheets of watercolour paper isn't practical. So I buy the pre-stretched pieces on a block. So that's a long way around to explain the paper that I was working on. And then I did the outline illustration in Pigma Micron pens. The reason I chose those is because the ink is waterproof, and as you'll see when I start to put the washes of colour on, that black ink of the outline is not going anywhere. Brilliant. So that's what I did. I set up the ink illustration first, and then I added what you see as the kind of washes of rainbow colours of the beetles. So I actually applied that technique to the whole piece of paper. So even though the finished product of the cover looks quite dark green overall, actually underneath that is a layer of the multicoloured beetles, and I did that with my coloured inks. So I saturated the paper with water, and then I kind of had fun, splashed around loads of colour and just let them bleed into each other, and really enjoyed the varying tones and textures that you get when you do that. And what it means is that each beetle is slightly different. It's not very meticulous and controlled in the way that I usually like to work, but it's a bit more kind of haphazard and organic. So I did that, and then I allowed the piece to dry completely, so a couple of days to make sure that it was really thoroughly dry. And then I worked with black Indian ink. Now, Indian ink is a very opaque black ink. It's also waterproof, like the ink in the Pigma Micron pens. And I used that with a brush to go in and basically fill in the background of the beetles. So rather than, when you look at the front cover of the pattern, you might think that I started with the dark background and added the coloured beetles on top. It was more like reversing that process and building the image up from the bottom to the top. So adding the dark colour was the final stage of the process. Well, the second to final stage. What I also wanted to talk about is how much of my illustration work takes place digitally. Because that might not be obvious, because the finished product looks so hand-drawn, and obviously here on the podcast I show you a lot of my work with traditional media, be it pen and ink or scratchboard. You don't get to see the digital side of the process, which I usually do in Photoshop. And in this case it was mostly, all I did was change the colours. So from the black Indian ink, I changed that colour to a very dark green, which reflects the green of the beetle jumper, not the one I'm wearing, but the other sample. And I use Photoshop to move components around and rearrange things. And one of the exciting things that means I can do is I lifted the Beatles from that front cover illustration and used them to create a repeating pattern, which you can see in the end papers of the booklet here. And I love creating repeating patterns, and we'll see, maybe I will get this Beetle repeat turned into a fabric at some point as well. That's one of the things I love. I love being able to design those extra components of a book and then being able to use them for other purposes as well. So yeah, I just wanted to talk you through a bit of that process, because it's not necessarily obvious when you look at the pattern how that illustration has come together. So I hope you enjoy watching a little bit of me working on that cover design. haven't been doing a huge amount of knitting lately, not compared to my usual level anyway. And when I have been picking up my knitting, I've been finding that it's in fairly short spurts of time here and there, and that I keep flitting from one project to another rather than having an extended period of focus on one particular project. And I don't know about you, but I find when I do that, I feel like none of the projects have that feeling of progress or significant moving forward. So instead of my usual approach in this episode, which is to pick one project and talk to you about it in depth, I thought I would pull out several of the projects that are vying for my attention at the moment and chat you through each one briefly and where I'm at with them. And the first one I've picked is one that you have seen before, and I think actually it's not going to look like it's progressed very much since you last saw it. So it's my Caledonia jumper by Sylvia Watts Cherry, and I love this textured argyle pattern around the bottom and the double moss stitch top of the body and the sleeves. And as you can see, I finished the body of the jumper and one of the sleeves, and I picked up and knitted the neckband. And I think a couple of episodes ago I even tried it on and showed you how it was looking. And my current state of affairs is that I'm about 2/3 of the way through the second sleeve. That seems like a point where the project should just slide gently downhill towards being finished, right? No, just feels like it's not moving forward. And I know that it'll get there. I'm picking it up and putting a few stitches on it here and there, and there's no particular reason that that I haven't been drawn to work on this. It's just that thing that's going on where I want to be doing all the different things all the time, and so focusing on one specific thing has become tricky. But I'm absolutely in love with this jumper and the yarn combination, so I know that I'm going to really love it when I finish it. It's just being patient with myself and giving it a few more weeks of a row here and there, and I think I'll have a new jumper to show you fairly soon. The second project that I've got ongoing, shall we say, is a rainbow coloured sock, and I don't think I've shown you this one before. But again, this is one that's been on the needles for several months, and I've just been picking it up here and there. And I think it's the kind of project that I probably cast on exactly for that purpose. I went through a phase after my surgery last year of making several different socks, because socks are an excellent portable projects, so they're comfortable to do if you're sitting in a chair, but they're also great if you're travelling, going to several hospital appointments, that kind of thing. So I did a lot of work on these socks in various waiting rooms and things like that. So this actually on the needles is the second sock. I've got a first sock here, and it's a self-striping sock yarn, so it is the most basic of basic plain stocking stitch socks. I didn't follow a pattern, it's just my usual recipe that I use. So a 2x2 rib at the top, plain stocking stitch down to the heel, which has a slip stitch pattern on it, turn the heel and a gusset and a barn toe. And it's worth chatting briefly about the barn toe, because that is the thing that turned me from a non-sock knitter into a sock knitter, because I do not enjoy grafting or Kitchener stitch, but the barn toe closes the toe of your sock like the top of a hat. You just decrease down to 8 or 10 stitches and then thread your end of your yarn through those stitches and pull it tight. So it gives a really nice finish to the toe, and it doesn't require you to dig around for a darning needle or try and remember that sequence of doing Kitchener stitch. So since then, socks have been a much more pleasurable project for me. So I've actually started the toe decreases on this second sock, so it is very close to being finished, and you'll be able to see that I decided to mismatch the rainbows on the first and second sock. I thought it would be just too correct if the socks were identical. So for the first sock I started with the purple, the second sock I started with the yellow, which is halfway through the sequence. So they just offset against each other ever so slightly, which I think is kind of cute. So the yarn itself is a UK-based dyer called the Yarn Badger, who I discovered during Yarndale last year, actually, when I was taking part in digital Yarndale. I discovered some people who were vending at the show who I didn't know of before, and Yarn Badger was one of them. So this colour is called Winter Rainbow, and for me, I think it's quite a bright rainbow, but that's maybe in comparison to all the muddy greens that you normally see me wear. I think it is quite muted. It's dyed on I think it's a wool, silk and yak base. So the base colour of the yarn is a little bit grey, which is what makes it nice and muted, and I really love it. So again, not a lot of work to do on this project to bring it to finishing point. So hopefully I'll have a new pair of socks to enjoy with my new jumper very soon. And finally, perhaps we come to the reason why I'm not finishing projects that are nearly finished and rather focusing on the shiny and the new, is that I am working on a test knit for Francesca Hughes. And I just saw Frankie's new design. It's a colourwork vest called Caper, so it's all over colourwork with a V-neck, and you steek it, so you cut the openings for the armholes and the neck, and I just thought it was gorgeous. And for ages I've been wanting to add a colourwork vest to my wardrobe, so I said yes, and here I am with a new project cast on that probably explains why older projects aren't getting finished. So I have decided to work my version of the caper vest in all shades of green. And I pulled yarn from my stash for this project, so I'm using all different shades of Jamieson's of Shetland, 8 different colours of green. And as you can see, not a huge amount of progress so far, but I love how the colourwork is looking already, and I just love the texture of Shetland wool in colourwork. I love how the woolen spun colours kind of fuzz together and make colourwork look fantastic. So I know that this is going to be a garment that I absolutely love and get a lot of wear out of. I've never had a colourwork vest before, so I'm quite excited to see how it'll fit in my wardrobe. I think it'll be a really useful thing to have going into the warmer seasons, because I'm somebody who tends to feel cold a lot of the time, so I'm often wearing cardigans and jumpers even throughout the summer. So to have a woolen garment that is slightly less coverage, I think it will be a good in-between piece for me. So yeah, slow and steady progress on this one alongside the other 2 projects, and you know, trying not to give myself a hard time for how long things are taking, because they're obviously going to take longer if you're working on lots of different things at once. And instead of worrying about the finished product, maybe just trying to focus a bit more on the process of each one and enjoy, you know, the immediate things. The textures of the yarns that I'm working with are all really different. I was going to say the colours are different. The colours aren't that different, especially between Caledonia and this vest. There's a lot of murky green going on, but there's never a time when murky green doesn't bring me joy. So yeah, lots of great things that I'm really enjoying about these knitting projects. I'm going to try and focus on that, and hopefully I won't even notice the time go by until they become finished objects. My sewing segment in this episode is going to be a tale of two halves. I've got a story of great success to share with you and an absolute tale of woe. So let's do the successful one first. If you follow me on Instagram, you probably will have heard a little bit about these projects already, but I recently finished a pair of red corduroy dungarees as part of my Make 9 projects for this year. If you're not familiar with it, Make 9 is a challenge started by my lovely friend Rochelle of Home Row Fibre Co, where you plan what projects you might like to make over the course of a year, whether they be knitting, sewing, various other kinds of crafts. Anything is welcome, and you can structure it however you want to. And for me this year, I decided to plan 9 sewing projects and 9 knitting projects, which I realise is hugely overambitious and actually unrealistic. But for me, it's not about kind of setting goals and giving myself a hard time if I don't achieve them. It's more about creating a vision and thinking about what kind of projects I would like to make, particularly in terms of structuring what I want to add to my wardrobe. But that said, it's April and I have only just finished the first of those projects, so clearly they're not all happening this year. But nonetheless, whenever I've done the Make 9 challenge before, I don't think I've completed any of the projects that I planned. So to finish even one feels like a huge achievement, and to finish it in such a way that I feel so proud of it. I cannot tell you how pleased I am with these dungarees. They are just a tale of absolute success. So I can't direct you to any specific pattern that I used because it was an absolute hodgepodge of different patterns. I used the trousers that I drafted from a pair of Burda pyjama trousers, and if you do want the links to the actual patterns I mention, I always put the details in the notes down below the video because I can never remember. So sometimes patterns have names and that's just about memorable, but with the kind of more commercial patterns, they just have numbers and I can't remember them off the top of my head. So I always put the details in the description box down below. So I used a Burda pattern for the trousers that was designed to be pyjamas. It was a pattern designed for jersey fabric with a gathered elasticated waistband. Obviously that's not going to work in chunky corduroy, which is what I find that I'm wanting to make my trousers out of. So what I did was I cut them in a calico, a plain cheap cotton fabric, and sewed them together just as I would if they were made of jersey, but I didn't gather the waistband. I draped it on my own body. So I tried the trousers on and then pinned that waistband into pleats at the front and darts at the back so that it fitted my actual body. And this is the only way that I have ever had success making trousers that fit. Whenever I've followed any kind of pattern for trousers, it's always been a recipe for disaster. But in this case, they were a huge success, and you will have seen me recently wearing the green version that I made. So it was the next step really to adapt that pattern into a pair of dungarees. So I took the bib from a dungaree dress pattern, which is a McCall's pattern that I've made several times before. And I didn't follow it exactly. I found that the proportions of that bib were a little bit wide for my chest, and when I leaned forward it would kind of buckle into a V shape at the front, so I narrowed it slightly, but otherwise I followed the pattern pretty much as it's given. And yeah, I just Frankensteined that dungaree bib onto the trousers, added a waistband to sandwich the two together, and in the case of the dungarees, rather than the trousers, instead of having a zip fly at the front, I added 2 button openings at the side, and they didn't need to be a covered button fly because dungarees, kind of like jeans, they can have exposed buttons. I think it works quite well. So they've got 2 metal buttons on each hip, and I'm so pleased with how they turned out. I also used, for the lining, I used a Beetle fabric that I recycled from a disastrous jumpsuit that I made last year. It was too small, in case you missed that episode, and as soon as I sat down in it, the bum ripped open. So it's been in the naughty corner for a while. So not only is it a successful pair of dungarees in its own right, it's also given new life and purpose to a disastrous project from before. So all in all, extremely satisfying. And some of the things I'm most proud of about them, apart from the fact that they're red dungarees and they're just delightful, is that I did a lot of hand finishing. So I only have a pretty basic sewing machine, and after sewing a lot of thick corduroy, particularly around the waistband where there were lots of layers of corduroy and interfacing to stabilise it, my sewing machine was starting to have a little bit of a meltdown, and I broke 3 needles in one morning. And that's when I thought, okay, it's time for me to do some hand sewing. So I hand finished the waistband. I also did hand sewn buttonholes because I didn't think there was any way the automatic buttonhole feature of my machine was going to go through all of those layers. And it took me the best part of a day to make 4 hand finished buttonholes. It was tedious, to say the least. But now it's done, I'm just so pleased with them, and I've barely taken them off since finishing. So brilliant. A huge tale of successful sewing. I'm still kind of riding on that because my sewing since then has been less successful and less satisfactory. So let's get into it. I've been having a go at making the Fairfield Shirt, which is a menswear pattern from Thread Theory Designs. That's a mouthful, isn't it? And I picked this pattern because I want to add a staple shirt to my wardrobe, and I have been making a shirt from a different company before, but it's come to my attention that they're not as size inclusive as we would like them to be, and I don't particularly want to work with a company and recommend a company that isn't inclusive. So I want to move on from that, but I'm also unhappy with various aspects of the fit of the shirt, particularly the collar. It just never sits right on my neck. So I've been looking for an alternative, and the Fairfield Shirt is what I've picked. And I've been having a go at making it in this fine green and white houndstooth, and hopefully, just like me, you're imagining how fantastic this fabric is going to look with my all green colourwork vest that I'm knitting, because that's what I'm envisioning. I think these two projects are going to be absolutely perfect together. And the thing I love about this pattern is it has a lot of details that other sewing patterns that I've worked on before don't really have, and possibly because it's menswear or possibly because it's an indie pattern, but it covers a lot of the finishing in finer detail. So it's got a double yoke at the back of the shirt, which means there's no raw edges on the inside at all. Everything's enclosed in the shoulder seams or this yoke seam at the back, and it guides you through doing flat felled seams around the armhole, which, if you're not familiar with sewing, you're definitely familiar with flat felled seams, because they're the seams you see on jeans where they're folded over and double stitched. So they're nice and strong and secure, and they also hide all the raw edges inside. So it's a really nice touch that the pattern guides you through doing that kind of finishing all around the armholes, inside the body and on the sleeves. Brilliant. Takes ages. What takes longer is if you flat fell seam your sleeves into the wrong armholes, because that's what I did. So that was extremely annoying. I was so upset with myself because I took so much time and care over sewing those seams so carefully. I only did one, okay? It's not as bad as sewing both in the wrong way. I did one and then I noticed. But the thing is, because the shirt has a cuff placket at the back of the arm, it has to sit at the back of the arm. You don't want the placket to sit at the front. There was no way around it. I had to rip that out, but I needed to put it aside for a week and let it cool down, let my emotions cool down before I went ahead and fixed it. But now that's done, it's fixed. I've now set both sleeves correctly into their armholes. So I proceeded to the next stage. And what did I do? I sewed the cuffs on inside out. I have no words. I'm just so angry with myself. I feel like I've been taking this project so slowly and carefully and really paying attention, but clearly not paying attention that well. So this one's back in the naughty corner and waiting for me to cool down enough to face the seam ripper again, and it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it when this project is finished, and as I say, I keep thinking of how fantastic it's going to look with that colourwork vest, and that's going to get me through. But my goodness, if I make another silly mistake on this, I am going to be very close to throwing it in the bin. So wish me luck, and hopefully we won't have any more complications with seeing this project through to completion. Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of the Green Bean podcast. Hope you've enjoyed seeing and hearing a bit about my various creative projects. If you want to catch me between now and the next episode, the best place to do so is on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Katie Greenbean. You will find that I share extra content there. There's an extra episode that gets shared in between every episode here on YouTube, and I also share pretty much weekly vlogs and updates of what's going on in my studio. So yeah, that's a way that you can find us and also make a financial contribution to this podcast, which is my main way of making an income. So huge thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon. Couldn't be doing it without you. Jack's fed up. I also want to say thank you to Will McNicol, whose guitar music is what accompanies these episodes. So grateful to you, Will, for letting me use your music, and yeah, it adds so much to my podcast. So I hope you enjoy it, and I recommend you checking out Will's music if you haven't already. So yeah, before Jack tries to escape anymore, thanks for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!